It's day 4 of the deadly siege at Kenya's Westgate Mall. Kenyan forces say they have subdued all the attackers, but Al-Shabaab militants say they are still holding hostages. The government prepares to answer tough questions over the dramatic terror attack, and we have lined up a comprehensive coverage of this developing story. It's 8 p.m. here in East Africa, and this is Africa Live. Thank you for joining us. I'm Pelina Karibe in Nairobi. We have lined up a comprehensive bulletin for you, plenty coming up, including these stories. New fears for South Africa economy as AMCO workers at Amplatz announced strike to start this Friday. And gearing up, Liverpool mild Suarez impact for Manchester United clash. I begin this bulletin here in Nairobi, where President Uhuru Kenyatta has just been addressing the nation. This being the 4th day after the dramatic terrorist attack at the Westgate Mall. President Kenyatta has announced that 5 terrorists were killed during the operation by Kenya's defense forces, and 11 others are now in custody. He also announced that 6 soldiers were killed during the operation. The president has announced 3 days of mourning starting Wednesday, where flags will fly at half-mast. Now, for the latest on this story, let's cross over to the Westgate Mall, where CCTV's Famida Miller is standing by. Famida, sources say there have been accounts of gunfire continuing to come from the shopping mall. Tell us what has been happening.
Well, Penina, we've been here outside Westgate Mall since the early hours of this morning, and earlier in the day, just before lunchtime, we did in fact hear those gunshots, quite rapid and a number of times increasing till later in the afternoon. But from about 3 p.m, those gunshots did decrease in number, larger gaps between those spurts of gunfire. Through the day, we've also heard explosions coming from Westgate Mall, sources indicating that some of those explosions were controlled by members of the security forces. They, of course, are combing Westgate Mall, looking for explosives that haven't been detonated, looking for hostages, whether they are alive or those who have been killed, looking for the bodies of hostages, as well as trying to round up all those attackers that were in that mall since Saturday. Now, as President Uhuru Kenyatta mentioned, 5 have been killed. That's down 1 from earlier statements from the police that 6 had been killed. Now, of course, looking at that address by President Kenyatta, no mention of this attack actually being over. Those are the claims that have been made in the last day, starting earlier on Monday afternoon. Since we've been here, because of the activity here, the number of troops coming in, the choppers flying overhead, as well as a military plane, and of course, those explosions and gunshots, no clear indication that this siege is in fact over. Penina.
All right, Famida, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks very much for joining us. That's Famida Miller live from the Westgate Mall. Now, it's been another agonizing day for families caught up in the Westgate tragedy. Many are struggling to find missing relatives. For others, their worst fears have come true. CCTV's Celestine Karane filed this report.
A victim from Westgate, making the final journey home. Her grieving elder brother didn't want us to broadcast his name, but he told us this was Veronica. She was just 25. She worked at Westgate Nakumat and was one of the many killed there. It is a story that has played out frequently at this mortuary since the weekend. For many other families, it's been a story of hunting and hoping, but fearing the worst. People trying to find relatives and friends missing after the tragedy are being directed to mortuaries and hospitals around the city. But for some, the search is frustrating. At the communication center, this family is searching for a 48-year-old father of 4. He'd been in the mall, even texted them on Sunday. But since then, they've had nothing.
Tangu Saturday tumekuwa tukitafuta yeye na hatujawahi kumpata.
We've been searching for him since all this began. We've been to various hospitals, Aga Khan, Avenue and Mata, but we haven't found him. Now we are searching the mortuaries because we feel helpless going back and forth.
Kama saa hii niko hapa City Mortuary na sijamuona.
Another family shares the frustration.
Mother-in-law alipata message jana.
My mother-in-law got a message from her son's phone saying it was found inside the mall. Now we came to Nairobi from Murang'a to see if we can find the young man. His name isn't in any list here, and now we've been asked to go and bring his photo.
Wamepotea hapatikani. Sasa tumeambiwa tuende tutafute picha yake.
There is some comfort from councillors. Many have travelled far to be here to help.
I took a bus from my hometown, 400 kilometers away. I was doing something else there, but I thought this tragedy, so many people have been affected. So with my training at university, I thought, let me come and assist.
But the only comfort for these people will be finding those lost still alive. Even as they were searching, it was reported that this mortuary has been told to prepare for a large influx of bodies. Celestine Karone, CCTV, Nairobi.
Now, for an African perspective, we're joined by Dr. Weston Shilahu, an African diplomacy expert at the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Shilahu, thank you for joining us. Now, the attack in Kenya is being blamed on the Al-Shabaab. Do you think adequate measures were put in place to avert this attack?
Thank you, lady. Adequate, it's difficult to really precisely pin what that means because this is a terror group, and one thing is that no matter how alert the intelligence systems could be, it's difficult to predict and anticipate an attack of this magnitude. So yeah, the government could have done more, especially in terms of intelligence gathering, but it's a kind of attack that can strike at any time, and as we witnessed, you can least expect when such a terror strikes.
Now, Al-Shabaab has attacked establishments in Somalia and Uganda and Kenya, among others. How best can these countries and other international partners defuse threats of groups like these, which have now become a global security problem?
Yes, going by the magnitude of loss in terms of life, property that has been visited upon Kenya, and going back to 2010, the violence that was also visited on Uganda during the 2010 FIFA World Cup, it's imperative that these countries synergize efforts in tackling these terrorist groups, especially Al-Shabaab, and they'll have to put efforts together, especially in terms of intelligence gathering, in terms of tightening the immigration processes to screen people who enter these countries so that they remain ahead of the game. Otherwise, going by the resistance that Al-Shabaab has displayed in Nairobi, they are quite daring, they are quite ahead of the game, if you like. And so the governments of the countries mentioned have really to do their work. They have got their work cut out.
And
no doubt about it.
And speaking of Al-Shabaab's resistance, going by this attack we've witnessed here in Nairobi, would you say that the Al-Shabaab has now become sophisticated, or is this another tactic by Al-Qaeda to maximize their operations by using its cell groups?
Well, it's a franchise of Al-Qaeda. It's difficult to divorce Al-Shabaab from Al-Qaeda. Basically one and the same thing, one is just an offshoot of the other. And therefore, going back to what I said, pretty daring. If a terror group, a cell like Al-Shabaab can hold an entire country's security mechanism to ransom and hold it up as it's been witnessed in Nairobi for this long, it means they're really daring, they're really sophisticated, they're really well networked, and it's difficult to crack it using the conventional methods of tackling crime and violence. And so the governments of the countries you mentioned earlier have to go back to the drawing board and up their game as far as security is concerned. It's not just a question of, for instance, borrowing from the states and such developed countries, because in these countries we also have got the question of porous borders. And so it's difficult just to anticipate that terrorists will get into the country through the airports and stuff like that. They can easily walk into these countries. And so it makes it much more difficult for countries like Kenya, Uganda, and the like, compared to the US and the developed world. And so, yeah, they have got their work cut out for them. Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab, they have demonstrated, going by the violence that Nairobi has experienced, that they're really a force to reckon with. And they can really inflict maximum pain, maximum violence, maximum economic loss to a country that's least prepared when they strike.
All right, Dr. Shilahu, we've got to leave it there for now. Thanks very much for these perspectives. That's Dr. Weston Shilahu from the University of Johannesburg, live for us from Johannesburg. All comments by Kenya's Foreign Minister Amina Mohamed have fueled speculation that the British woman claimed to be among the militants could be the so-called White Widow, Samantha Luth-White. The Foreign Minister said the woman in question had allegedly been involved in terrorism many times before. Maria Galang tells us more about the woman known as the White Widow.
Nicknamed the White Widow by police and our white sister by sympathizers, 29-year-old Samantha Luth-White first caught the attention of authorities back in 2005. Her husband, Jermaine Lindsay, was one of the 4 suicide bombers behind the 7/7 attacks in London. Those bombings killed 52 people. Luth-White denied any knowledge of what her husband, the father of one of her 2 children, had planned, and she slipped out of sight. In recent years, though, Luth-White based herself in Kenya and become infamous, accused of helping fund Al-Qaeda in East Africa and even of training all-women jihadists in Somalia. Luth-White's been wanted since 2010 for plotting to bomb tourists in Mombasa. Her alleged accomplice, Jermaine Grant, is facing trial at the moment. Luth-White, though, managed to stay ahead of authorities. She may have been a hard woman to find, at least for Kenyan police. But Luth-White made no secret of her commitment to the cause of jihad. She writes a web diary that gives a chilling insight into the mind of a female jihadist. She wrote, "I look around at how beautiful jihad is. It's alive in Kenya, it's alive in me, and I'm breathing jihad. It's my time." Her most recent entry, "Fear can make you do many things." Maria Galang, CCTV, Nairobi.
Let's now cross over to Nina Maripos. She's live for us in Washington, D.C. Natalie Fury is joining us live from London. Thank you both for joining us. And Nina, let me begin with you. Kenyan Foreign Minister Amina Mohamed said that some of these suspects involved in the mall attack hail from America. How has this news been received there in the U.S.?
Well, the FBI is refusing to say either way whether or not those claims are true. As you know, the Kenyan Foreign Minister said 2 to 3 Americans may have been involved. 2 from Minnesota. Minneapolis has the largest Somali community in America. Some 35,000 Somalis live in Minnesota. And 1 possibly from another place, we think maybe Kansas City. But again, the FBI is refusing to say while the investigation is underway. The local FBI in Minneapolis, though, has said that it's extremely worried about the circulation of online recruitment videos that Al-Shabaab has been targeting Americans here in this country in the diaspora. And there have been occasional reports up to 20 young men are thought or known to have gone over to Somalia and East Africa to fight and die for Al-Shabaab. So it's clearly a concern, but U.S. intelligence up until now has been much more focused on the financing of these terrorists, of individual members of the diaspora who've been supporting them financially. So this clearly takes us in a whole new direction.
Right. Natalie, let me come to you there live in London. And Britain seems to be a place where Al-Shabaab has been recruiting. For how long has this been going on?
Well, it's hard to tell, of course, since 2006 when Al-Shabaab formed the first British Muslim Somali that was known to have died for Al-Shabaab. Took place in 2007, so that's the first known recruit from the UK that became a terrorist bomber. But in 2011, MI5 did say that there is a real threat of British Muslims that are part of Al-Shabaab being present here, and also of an increase in people travelling from the UK to train in Somalia with Al-Shabaab, much like Nina was just mentioning, those that are going from the US. And now it does seem that this all did start to escalate in 2010 when Al-Shabaab did start to circulate more propaganda in English on the internet to try to recruit more converts to Muslim. They highlighted popular radical Muslim clerics in the UK as part of their propaganda. So that seems to be really when the increase in recruits from countries like the UK did start to happen.
Nina, coming back to you there in Washington, there are reports that Somalis living in the US have protested against Al-Shabaab. Could you give us more details on this?
Well, the Somali community is known to be very tight-knit, which has been made it much harder for law enforcement in the US to work with the community. I should start by saying that as a whole, the community has very much distanced itself from Al-Shabaab, and there have been very strong responses from community elders saying that they condemn these attacks, that they have no sympathy or empathy with Al-Shabaab. In the state of Ohio, there have been protests among Somalis against the president of Somalia and a visit by him to this country. They accuse the Somali government of being in cahoots with Al-Shabaab. Now, if you remember, that's one of the arguments that Doctors Without Borders cited for pulling out of Somalia altogether. This allegation that Somali officials were somehow cooperating with Al-Shabaab militants. We did speak to a local imam in Virginia where there is a strong Somali contingent, a community. He said that he is working on a dialogue between Kenyans and Somalis here to try and initiate some kind of reconciliation. There have also been complaints from Minneapolis, members of the Somali community saying that they warned against this recruitment, warning the authorities that this sort of online video recruitment was happening, that young men were going over, and allegedly they were suppressed by the Islamic Council and fellow Muslim leaders into silence. So that has been the response of the Somali American community thus far.
Natalie, coming back to you, you did tell us that the recruitment seemed to have increased since 2010. So what are the security agents there in London doing about that?
Well, what we've heard from since the attack in Nairobi is that, of course, that UK intelligence officials are working with governments abroad. They're working, in this instance, with the Kenyan government, sharing intelligence information, helping to support in any way they can. Now, they are obviously not being very outspoken about how they are going about looking at these terror suspects that may be based here in the UK. They've said, for example, in the instance of Samantha Laithwaite, that they are not going to confirm or deny her involvement as this investigation in Kenya is ongoing. So no reports yet about a particular stance being taken, just that they are looking into increased intelligence cooperation with those in Kenya in light of that attack.
All right, Natalie Fiery live for us in London. Nina Ma reports live in Washington. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Well, overnight, Kenya police had claimed the siege at Westgate was over, but it quickly became clear the fight was still on. CCTV's Robert Nagila has more.
The first known images of the gunman who took Westgate captured by the mall security CCTV system. Kenyan security forces claim to have killed 6 of the attackers, but were unable to say how many were still alive and fighting. From the gunfire and explosions, though, it was clear several militants were holding out. The Kenyan military revealed 3 of its troops had died from their injuries, 8 more were in hospital. And Kenya's foreign minister told American TV this was a sophisticated attack.
It was professional, it was very well coordinated. Now everybody needs to up their game.
Well, 4 days after the attack began, and there's a bit of frustration beginning to creep in, especially amongst the journalists. Understandable, because lives are at stake. However, when information has been forthcoming, it's coming from several government agencies, and it's rather confusing, as if they're not reading from the same page. The security forces enjoy an enormous amount of goodwill among Kenyans, who are desperate for an end to this siege. But confused messages are doing little to reassure people who've been on edge now for days. Robert Nagila, CCTV, Nairobi.
Now, as we told you at the beginning of this bulletin, President Uhuru Kenyatta has just been addressing the nation. This being the 4th day of the dramatic terrorist attack at the Westgate Mall, the president has announced that 5 terrorists were killed during the operation by Kenya's defense forces, and 11 others are now in custody. He also announced that 6 soldiers were killed during that operation. The president has announced 3 days of mourning starting Wednesday, where flags will fly at half-mast. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Our head is bloodied but unbowed. The criminals found us unafraid, as we shall ever be. We cannot be conquered. Our confrontation with the terrorists at the Westgate Mall left 240 casualties. I report with great sadness that 61 civilians lost their lives in the attack. 6 security officers also made the ultimate sacrifice to defeat the criminals. Forensic teams are still at the scene of the tragedy and will put together a final report. Towards the tail end of the operation, 3 floors of the Westgate Mall collapsed, and there are several bodies still trapped in the rubble, including the terrorists. Starting tomorrow, I have instructed the Interior Ministry to keep Kenyans informed of the progress of the forensic investigations. Of the injured, 62 were operated on and remain hospitalized. Many others suffered non-physical trauma and shock and are receiving counseling at various facilities throughout the city of Nairobi. It has not been an easy time for any of us, least of all the affected. Our losses are immense. To the honor and memory of those who lost their lives in this attack, I have declared 3 days of national mourning starting tomorrow, during which official flags will fly at half-mast throughout the country. Ladies and gentlemen, as I had vowed earlier, we have ashamed and defeated our attackers. That part of our task has been completed by our multi-agency security team. 5 terrorists were killed with gunfire. 11 suspects are in custody in connection with the attack. Intelligence reports had suggested that a British woman and 2 or 3 American citizens may have been involved in the attack. We cannot confirm the details at present, but forensic experts are working to ascertain the nationalities of the terrorists. I promise that we shall have a full accountability for the mindless destruction, deaths, pain, loss, and suffering we have all undergone as a national family. These cowards will meet justice, as will their accomplices and patrons, wherever they are. Fellow Kenyans and friends of Kenya, our solidarity, patience, and resolve has seen us through the worst of this crisis. It is to you that I turn for strength, love, and aid to those affected by this encounter with the forces of evil.
Let's now get the latest in business. Rama is here with that.
Thank you very much, Benina. Here's what's coming up on Biz Africa tonight.